Kundalini, who's got it and who wants it? The subtitle is that Kundalini is believed to catalyze spiritual evolution. But it's actually more than that. Kundalini is spiritual evolution. In this slide, if you notice this book up here, it's called Kundalini Rising, Exploring the Energy of Awakening. And I'm starting with it because it's an excellent book. It's probably 3 inches thick, and it consists of stories by people who have had Kundalini arousals, and also some authorities on Kundalini by virtue of their own arousals. It's published by Sounds True, highly recommended because it's really a fascinating book by really intelligent people. And so I pulled some of the definitions or the phrases that they use to describe Kundalini: planetary initiation into a new level of consciousness, when the bioelectrical energy of a physical body and elemental life force connect to the universe as a whole, entry into transcendence. Someone else said, we are energy fields wired to wake up to our true nature. I love this one, new octaves of existence. And then the here and now realization of what is that settles down into a quiet home. Other definitions, sudden psychic or healing abilities, a much deeper quality of presence, intuitive responses to formerly stressful situations. The senses become more alert, the body more alive and harmonious. And shift from a personal identity to a timeless, boundless awareness of self. Someone else said, reaching an untapped potential in the brain that transforms human life and bestows undreamed of intellectual, supersensory, and artistic gifts to the individual in a manner beyond imagination at presence. Someone else said, can be out-of-body adventures, supersensory episodes, dream images, and a roller coaster ride of energy transmissions. I particularly like this description of what Kundalini is and feels like. It's from a woman named Bonnie Greenwell, author of a book called Energies of Transformation, a Guide to the Kundalini Process. And she wrote, when Kundalini becomes awakened, it feels like the life force has amplified itself and has suddenly become even more alive. This is felt in its movement up the spine, and sometimes as an electrical or radiating feeling in every cell. Our natural energy, which has quietly danced through our bodies up until this point, carrying the messages of the mind and senses through the nervous system, has slipped into a higher vibration. So at this point, I'm going to temporarily depart from the slideshow because I want to share with you my Kundalini experiences. It's kind of a long story, but I hope you'll bear with me and realize that every single thing I'm going to say is relevant to this presentation. I want to share it because it's going to loop at various points back into the presentation. It's going to take us to analyze the symptoms of Kundalini, some science on Kundalini, what science we do have, and also you may well have some resonances with what I'm going to say. And I hope that if it has already risen in you, or even if it hasn't, that maybe something that I say will help you recognize your power. Other people would argue with it, but I say, and I'll explain to you in my story, that it is you. And you do have some mastery over it by what it is that how you respond to it. Like I said, it's going to be a long story. I hope you'll be okay with the length of the story, but I promise you some treasures in it. Does that sound like a plan? Is that okay with you guys to tell this story? So I have to start back when I was a child and living in Louisiana with my parents, and every weekend, faithfully, we would go out to the river, to boat, or sit on a pier and fish and just watch the water. And I noticed that was when I felt my most alive, that I would just watch the ripples on the water, watch the sunlight, and I had this sense of a sacred presence in everything. And I felt connected to that presence. Felt as if whatever it was loved me, and I loved it back so much. And I had the same feelings and sensations when I was in my little Catholic church. Some of you may be Reformed Catholics and relate to this story. I took myself, no one else in my family went to church, but I took myself, literally walked a mile to the church every Sunday, every single day during the 40-day Lent period, because when I was there, I felt the same way as on those rivers and bayous. It was in the flickering of the candle light, the beautiful stained glass, even the smell of the wooden pews, the choir singing the harmony, the incense. And I just felt that there was something alive that I was part of and that knew I existed. And I continued to go to church, and by age 13, wanted to become a nun, wrote off to all the Franciscan and Carmelite people. And that was my intention, but my parents said, no, you have to wait until you're 15 years old. Little did I know that when I was on the bayou, when I was in the church, what I was doing was slipping into a meditation state. It was decades before I realized that that was awakening my sensory awareness, all of those elements and those situations, and putting me in touch in a very deep way with my true self. Well, after I met this boy at 15 and got into relationships and got really busy, and especially when I was 18, attending a history class in college, and the professor said that, oh, it's all just made up, it's just pagan holidays, none of it's real. I got really upset and angry and said, I've been hoodwinked. Somebody has tricked me. I was a fool. There's no real God. There's nothing really there. They just wanted us all to join this church like sheep. And I believed that until something extraordinary happened to me when I was 22, 24 years old. And it was the most powerful event in my life. I didn't know what it was, but I'll describe it to you and you'll see the resonances with that Bonnie Greenwell description. So what happened was I was divorced and had a 2-year-old daughter, and suddenly began to experience some agonizing stabbing pains in my lower abdomen. And by the 3rd week, the pain had become constant and unremitting. So I went to the doctor. The doctor examined me on a Friday afternoon and said, come back on Monday at noon. And I said, okay, went my way that weekend, didn't think much about it. But on Monday, when I got into my little red Carmen Ghia and got on the interstate, I'm driving along and I suddenly realized that the doctor was seeing me on his lunch hour. So there could be something really wrong. And I didn't believe in God consciously anymore, but I remember saying, I don't know if there's a God or not, but if there is, please don't let anything happen to me because I'm the only one who can take care of my little girl. And before those words had completely crossed my mind, something extraordinary happened. This cold chill flashed up from my feet and then burst into this warm, flowing waves of light. And I just, every cell, every atom of my body just exploded into this blissful light. And I just, all I could say was, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I didn't know what it was, but I remember looking down at the pores of my arms to see if they were enlarging because it felt like everything was enlarging. And I remember looking into the rearview mirror of my car and seeing myself just tears streaming down my eyes, tears of gratitude. And then I was behind my body and I didn't know who was driving that car. I could see my hand on the steering wheel. And then this flood of realizations came into my mind. And I knew that there was no such thing as death, that when we die, we burst into this light, and that we are eternally part of this force, and all fears, all concerns disappeared. And somehow, I don't know where I was the other 20 minutes it took me to get to the doctor's office. But when he examined me, he said, "Oh, that big tumor the size of an orange is gone. Must have been the medicine I gave you over the weekend." And I had had the same pain when I got in that car, and it was not his medicine that created that healing. And I absolutely did not know what to do with that. I was still angry at the Catholic Church. I didn't believe in God, but I knew that there was some force inside or outside of me. I was never thinking in both ands those days. It was always either or. And I had no conceptual framework for it whatsoever. So really, I only told two people about it. And one person, my mother-in-law, said, "Praise God, you've had a healing." And I went, eh. And then the other person just looked at me and went, "Are you all right?" And so I didn't say anything, and I went my merry way until it came to the mid-1980s. I got this highly concentrated series of story assignments from newspapers and magazines. By then, I was a freelance writer and the director of a peace and justice group. I had two daughters, was the only parent, no help from anybody. I was just working crazily. So the realizations that came had to have come to me through my work, because that's literally all I did. And these story assignments were on everything from isolation tanks, float tanks, to AVE, audio-visual goggles, to hot yoga, rebirthing, now called transformational breathing. And it just went on. And every single time I would come back from one of these experiences, I would realize that was just how I felt when I was a child. Now, I still didn't put the name meditation on it. I had no understanding of meditation whatsoever. I knew that something was happening. It was too much, too many things, many other stories that I covered and was able to experience. At one point, I fell in love with crystals. I mean, this was the height of the New Age, right? At least here in the US. Fell in love with crystals and always kept one in my pocket. And a magazine had assigned me to go interview the Smithsonian anthropologist in Washington, D.C. to do a story on the Chittamauga Indians. So while I was waiting for the appointment, I walked into the Smithsonian Museum, and there was this massive crystal, must be 7, 8 feet wide and about 5 feet tall, this giant amethyst from the Amazon or somewhere. And just on a whim, I took the crystal out of my pocket and put it on my third eye and began to hear these high, high pitches of sound. They were so beautiful, and they split. As I listened, they split into many, many, many more pitches, and the frequencies rose higher and higher. And I became very disoriented, so much so that I went into the crystal shop and started listening to the crystals sing and missed my appointment. I actually had to stay in DC another day to reset the appointment with the guy. I didn't know what it was. But another time back in Baton Rouge, when I was visiting a meeting of Eckankar, which is, I don't know if it's still around, it was the religion of light and sound. And they sing this as part of their gathering. They sing this sound. It goes like this. And you can hear how that particular muscle configuration to sing that sound raises some higher frequencies. And now, as I was listening to him, my third eye and my forehead burst open into this pulsing orb of indigo light. And I was just flooded with these feelings of love. I didn't know it was Kundalini, still didn't have any conceptual framework for that, either one of those things. So I just went along and realized that there may not be a guy with a beard sitting on a throne in heaven, but there was something. And I began to read more and more and more and more. And as my professional life went stellar. Soon I was writing for a lot of magazines, and the Peace and Justice group was doing terrific, wonderful things. Even took me on a visit to Medjugorje, Yugoslavia, where I reported on the visionaries there who were seeing the Virgin Mary. I mean, everything was folding, you see. All these stories were folding into my own growth. I began to realize that I needed some help because I had a 16-year-old runaway daughter, and my 8-year-old hated me due to a lot of broken marriages. So the newspaper sent me to interview a priest, and he was a lighting director for the University Theater, which still to this day I think is wonderfully ironic and delicious. And at the end of the interview, I said, "How do I pray?" And he said, "Well, you just open your heart and say anything you want to say, and then you listen." And I said, "Yeah, you make that sound really easy, but considering all of my issues, by then I was just absolutely horrible, persecuting even to all religious people." But I did that. And this was the second time I'd asked for help. Kundalini experience was the first one at Interstate Healing. The second time, 2 days later, I finished writing an article. It was right after Christmas, middle of the night, 2, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I moved into, because of the nature of the article, because I had loved the person that I had written about. It was a human interest feature state, although I wouldn't know that for decades later. I was quiet. My thinking mind was quiet because of the late hour. My delta, sleepy delta, was extended. The story had been very visual, and my heart was wide open. So I was pacing around in my bedroom, and I heard this voice. I don't know if it was an impulse or an actual voice. Whatever it was, it said, "Sit down, pick up pen and paper, and write what you hear." Well, I was very accustomed to doing that. Every interview I ever did was exactly what I did. And what I heard was the wisest, the kindliest, the most lyrical voice that loved me so much and accepted me so completely and gave me a solution to my runaway daughter that I had never thought of before, through all the social workers, through all the psychiatrists, all the court-ordered people. No solutions. In 2 paragraphs, I saw what to do. So for the next 12 years, I kept sitting down and getting the solutions. You're doing the same thing now in Awakened Mind Meditation. You're connecting with that voice of wisdom that is who you are at your core. But I didn't know that for literally 12 years. I thought, if this is a dead person on the other side, they really learned a lot when they died, because I'm not finding this in any books. And so I just kept listening and listening. And my meditative writings at one point said, "You're going to have an important opportunity and you're going to learn how to meditate." And I said, "Meditation, I don't have time for that. I don't really know what it is." But I was kind of on the lookout, and this rather extraordinary series of coincidences happened, like dominoes falling one after another. And I found myself landing in an Edgar Cayce study group, where I spent every Tuesday night for the next 10 years doing inner cleanup work, and with people who to this day are my dearest and most beloved friends. We had a book called A Search for God, a 2-volume set of study guides. And the study guides, the Search for God book had every single thing my writings had been teaching me for the previous 7 years. Every single concept. I don't know if you know about Edgar Cayce. He's called the sleeping prophet because he would put himself in a state of hypnosis and go into a trance and speak while he was sound asleep. He didn't remember a single thing he said afterwards. He had an 8th grade education, no exposure to anything but his Methodist religion. He was a very devout Christian, which bled into everything he said. On some level, there would be some part of him that would remember some Bible verse. But here in the first chapter on meditation in the Search for God book, he said, all force is vibration, as all comes from one central vibration and its own creative forces, that of the divine, as manifested in man, is the same vibration, taking different form. And I thought, now that I can believe in, and had experienced in many ways and on many different levels, although I didn't have the labels for anything. I knew it was a force because I could feel it. Every time I went into the Casey style of meditation, something would happen. There would be a hum, there would be a vibration, the purple orb in my forehead, the high pitches. I knew that something was arousing in me and that it had to be then both and rather than either or. Something in me that was part of that force, part of that source. He also said, electricity or vibration is that same energy, same power ye call God. Not that God is an electric light or an electric machine, but that vibration that is creative is of that same energy as life itself. As is understood, life, God, in its essence, is vibration. So I want to show you. So this is Edgar Casey on meditation, which we did during every single meeting, at the end of which we sent out healing energy to others. Said meditation is the emptying of ourselves of all that hinders the creative force from rising along the natural channels of our physical bodies to be disseminated through the sensitive spiritual centers in our physical bodies. When meditation is properly entered into, we are made stronger mentally and physically. Now, I was really slow on the uptake a lot of the time, and I didn't realize that he was talking about the Kundalini. I thought he was just talking about energy. Still didn't know what the Kundalini was. He said, when we quiet the physical body through turning the mind toward the highest ideal, there are aroused actual physical vibrations as a result of spiritual influence becoming active on the sensitive vibratory centers in the body, stimulating the points of contact between the soul and its physical shell. Let us trace this activity. When we attune ourselves to the infinite, the glands of reproduction may be compared to a motor which raises the spiritual power in the body. With the arousing of the image or ideal, this life force rises along what is known as the Appian Way. This is the road that led south. I don't know where he got that, the south out of Rome into all the rest of the world, or the silver cord, to the pineal center in the brain, whence it may be disseminated to those centers that give activity to the whole mental and physical being. It rises then to the hidden eye in the center of the brain system. Someone wrote pituitary body, which is just back of the middle of the forehead. Thus, on entering meditation, there arises a definite impulse from the glands of reproduction that passes through the pineal to the pituitary gland. Whatever the ideal of an individual is, and ideal means what you hold in mind is your intention, it is propelled upward and finds expression in the activity of the imaginative forces, meaning you are projecting it through your imagination into the world. If this ideal is material, there is built more and more into the body a love for and a tendency towards things of the earth. If the ideal or image is of a spiritual nature, I have to move some things out of the way to see, there is spiritual development. And indeed, I could feel this. And I would strongly suspect that if you're a meditator or if you're doing any kind of spiritual work, you've felt it all. I didn't actually put the label of Kundalini on to what Casey was describing for a long time. In 1998, I took my meditative writings, which were completely universal in nature and not specific just to me. In the universal laws, I could see what to do, but they never told me what to do, which is why I trusted them, no doubt, until 2005. After I wrote my book called The Voice of the Soul, A Journey into Physics and the Wisdom of God, which contained a selection of meditative writings and a narrative. An editor said, "You're going to have to write your spiritual journey." So I went, "Oh no, I don't want to tell this story." But I did. And when I finished with it, I reread it and said, I have no proof of this. There is no scientific evidence of this whatsoever. And I'm not going to publish this book, and nobody else is going to publish it unless I have some scientific proof. Right after that, within the next few hours or the next day, I started getting an intuitive realization that I needed to go to the Edgar Cayce's bookshop, which was just down the road from where I was in Virginia Beach, and look for the magazine called Common Boundary. And I'd written for Common Boundary years before. It's an international magazine on art, creativity, and spirituality. But I hadn't seen it. It, just wasn't carried in every old bookshop. But I walked into the ARE bookstore, and my eyes, like a laser, went to the magazine. And on the cover of it was a preview of an article inside that was titled "The Brainwaves of Healing," an interview with Anna Wise. So I read the article and just threw the magazine up into air, because every single thing I had just written in that book could be explained by the language of brainwaves. That was my first proof. I had a second one and a third one, and then I did publish the book. I contacted Anna and said, "This is amazing." And I wrote a paragraph or two in an email, and she wrote back and said, "It sounds like you understand this from the inside, that all you need is the labels. You should come study with me." Well, I was selling my book, selling a CD, giving talks. I said, "Nah, not going to do that." But over the years, I kept writing back to her and saying, "Can I Xerox this page out of your book to give it to my students of classes and intuition and dream interpretation and meditation and all the stuff I was teaching?" She said, sure, but you need to come study with me." And in 2001, I did go to her class, and she read the book. I stayed up all night reading it, actually, because she was in the book and with her brainwaves. And I had the most amazing experience at Esalen while hooked up to the mind mirror. But still, even after that, I did not want to spend what cost then $18,000 to be certified. And the mind mirror was $4,500. It was very expensive. Plus, she lived in California. By then, I was on the East Coast. So I just kept Xeroxing her pages. But then my meditative writings in 2005 started to urge me to go and study with her. And it was the first time that it ever happened. And I kept arguing and saying, because by then I was in dialogue. I'd ask a question, get an answer. Sometimes I would argue with the answer till I fully understood the guidance. And all that the writings would say is, there are things you do not know. So I signed up for the first seminar, taking a huge leap of faith, didn't intend to go past that. And when I walked into Anna's house where she was teaching in San Rafael, California, I immediately heard, "Oh, you're going to take over her work." And I batted that away and said, "Oh, you ego, that's a crazy idea. I have my own work." But every time I went to study with Anna, this now I know to be Kundalini was arousing. It would start back at home before I even got on the plane. This humming, this buzzing, this incredible excitation. And I was a terrible student for Anna. She hated me because I was so excited and I had so many questions. And she was the daughter of a 2-star general. You shut up in her class. And she came to love me over time. And I eventually started to, she called me to assist her for 4 years running at Esalen. We became soul sisters, but I could feel the Kundalini in her. My energy field by then was so sensitive, and she was in full Kundalini. I don't want to say awakening, because she'd awakened to Kundalini long before that. But she was in arousal, and so much so, 2 other people in our class of 7 were also having Kundalini reverberations from her. And it was not always good, actually. It was painful, physically painful for some people. I was just excited. But then I understood everything that had happened. Pulsating indigo orb in my third eye. I understood the healing on the interstate. Everything that when electricity had crawled up my spine during Casey meditation, the singing pitches, I said, oh, for heaven's sake, all of this is Kundalini. Anna had so much Kundalini that she, and you may know this story, she used to, when she was studying with Max, meditate for 15 hours a day. And somehow Max didn't tell her that that was a really bad idea. And so she continued to do it. And she, at the time she wrote her book, her first or second book actually, had so much Kundalini that she was able to point her finger at a remote control car and move it. She was just absolutely crackling with it. And so she is the perfect person to give you these Kundalini symptoms that we're going to look at now. She says, the following symptoms do not all occur in any one person, and they may occur at different times, spaced very far apart. Some people only lightly experience a few of these symptoms, yet are nevertheless undergoing Kundalini awakening. Some experience one type and then get a break before experiencing a completely different set. Others may go through the whole range quickly and slowly. And here are the symptoms. Physical sensations include tingling, crawling, or itching on the inside of the skin. It's on the insides of the soles of my feet, and it just really nonstop. Can be a feeling of inner vibration, bubbling, quaking, or shivering. Because the physical symptoms often begin in the root chakra and compressed nerves at the base of the spine, the initial sensations may begin in the lower extremities, frequently the toes, and particularly the left toe, and called that the Cheeto, after the American cheesy snack. Body movements range from simple rhythmical swaying, especially during meditation, to more extreme spontaneous yoga postures, as the energy pushes the body into specific positions in its attempt to open the channels of flow, most frequently in times of rest and repose. You may experience a sense of elongation, especially of the back and spine. Visual symptoms range from brief flashes of light inside the head to full-blown, lengthy spiritual visions. One might also experience the seed of light, a tiny point of light that appears in the third eye area between the eyebrows. Sometimes referred to as the blue pearl, this light will seem to appear between you and anything you're looking at. Luckily for me, I've only had that a couple of times. That is extremely disconcerting when your eyes are wide open. Sometimes that seed of light is really just a geometric, I don't know, shape or form, it changes form, but it's alive, and it's a symptom of awakening. Illumination. Some rare individuals have been known to glow visibly in the dark as a result of this awakening. The halo in religious art is not simply an artist's rendition of a representation of spirituality, but a visible illumination caused by light emanating from the crown chakra and the circle of chakras around the head, top of the head. We're going to talk more about the science of all this and the chakras in a little bit. Auditory symptoms. Hearing can become distorted. A wide range of inner sounds can occur, including ringing, hissing, crackling, buzzing, whistling, whooshing, roaring, knocking, ocean sounds, musical notes, or even voices. There's a wonderful book written by Swami titled The Music of Life, and he really goes through a lot of specificity about the effect of what he's basically describing as the Kundalini, but how it affects the hearing, how it gives life to everything in the earth, that the sound is the center of the earth, of all existence. Temperature changes include sensations of extreme heat manifesting in two ways: hot flashes in the body or extremities of the body, especially the hand, becoming excessively hot to the touch. These hot flashes, when they happen, whether they're Kundalini or actual psychomotor neurological event, talk about mess up brainwaves. They vibrate the electrodes, and it looks like you're going as nuts as you actually are, because you're not just hot. Men may not realize this, but I've seen my body temperature raised by 15 degrees on the temperature sensor during one of these hot flashes. And it's you really have to have a lot of mastery to breathe your way through these things. Changes in breathing patterns. These most frequently occur during meditation and range from short, sharp, and shallow to long, extended, slow breaths, almost resembling the cessation of breathing. Now, this is where it gets hard, the emotional swings. No emotion is off limits or out of bounds. You might experience sensations of bliss, harmony, peace, and universal joy for increasingly longer periods of time. Or you could swing sharply into feelings of despair, low self-esteem, fear, anger, or self-doubt. As you're going to see in a bit, what's happening is this energy is pummeling your brain. No doubt that's what's responsible, but it's also clearing your entire system. As that happens, if you haven't done your inner work, like the work I did for 10 years with the Casey study group, with my meditative writings, and continue to do almost daily, you can lose track of yourself and not realize that you're being cleared by this Kundalini life force. And you don't need to slip into the memories and the experiences, but you can just observe them from a distance. I met a woman, I was interviewing some speakers at a psychic development conference at the ARE to write my second book, Your Psychic Soul. And I had to take part in the class and was paired up with a woman who told me later on that she had had a Kundalini arousal during a darshan transfer of energy, Shaktipat transfer of energy from Sai Baba. And it had actually occurred a year after she'd met Sai Baba, and she blasted into light. And she was actually a trainer for Stan Grof's spiritual emergency movement, but the energy was so powerful, even though she was living at the Fentorn community, which is all spirituality, and the northeast coast of Scotland. But maybe that big field of energy powered up her Kundalini even more. And she said she spent a solid year feeling like the scum of the earth. So even with her resources, see, she wasn't able to find that part of herself that could distance her and observe rather than be steeped in the experiences. And this actually happens for a lot of people. Well, I don't want to say a lot. It happens for some people. There's a book that we're going to look at later, and I'll tell you some stories about, that psychiatrist Lee Sanella wrote of his patients. And he had enormous insights, but people do, in losing their self-identification for identification with this force, this source, they can get lost. Perceptual changes. They may not sound much here, but if you experience the sense of growing to a great size, expanding beyond your body, or having out-of-body experiences, or detachment or dissociation, this can be serious. This is why the title of this webinar is Kundalini, Who's Got It and who wants it. We want you to be aware. I want you to be aware that this involves some very powerful changes in the body, mind, and spirit. Now, this one, everybody loves this. These symptoms: changes in sexual energy. Sexual intercourse and/or orgasm can temporarily stimulate and increase the activity of the Kundalini energy. After an orgasm, you may feel increased symptoms in any of the categories discussed above, especially body sensations and body movement. The awakening of the Kundalini may also stimulate increased sexual desire. The arousal of the energy itself can feel like an orgasm and has been referred to as a deep, ecstatic, and blissful internal tickle. Yes. When it is complete and moves up above the lower sexual chakras, it is experienced as a total body orgasm. And that's what I experienced on the interstate and have since. And people talk about as a blast of Kundalini. It's really nice. So this is, now we're going to talk about a bit of the science here and why these things are happening and how, at least to some extent, you can at least attempt, if not completely master this energy. So this is a book Anna had on her bookshelf and I snatched up. And Lisa Nella, psychiatrist, this is a classic among Kundalini books. I think he was out at California and he had 17 patients that he wrote about in the Kundalini Experience book who were experiencing psychosis, intense back pain, dissociation. They didn't know who they were confused. And when he traced things back, he discovered that almost all of them were meditating too long at a time. And it had these powerful Kundalini awakenings that they were not prepared for, and they did not understand what they were or what was happening. So the case histories are really fascinating to read. Highly encourage you to get this book. Excuse me. But the thing I want to talk to you about here is something that he talks about at the end of his book, a physics explanation by Itzhak Bentov, who wrote this book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum. It's dense with physics, but Bentov had some theories about the Kundalini that I think are valid and dependable and are helpful for us to think about, especially because you can have a huge arousal, as that last Kundalini symptom said, in the root chakra and in the second chakra, and absolutely get sex crazed. There was a guy with the Edgar Cayce people. I don't know how I found this out. I think I read it somewhere. And he was complaining because he was in so much sexual desire and he was married and he just wanted to jump on every woman he met. He just could not control himself. Well, what was happening is he had super activated the root chakra, energy center at the base of the spine, and the second chakra, which is associated with sexual energy, and it was not disseminating through the chakras. So it's important for us to, if and when we go into a Kundalini awakening or arousal, to recognize that you can yourself, by the power of your mind, move this energy. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. What Itzhak Bentov and then Lisa Nella said is actually happening is that in actuality, this coiled serpent of the Kundalini is intrinsic to us before we're born. It is coiled up as a potential residing in the DNA. All Hindu people put this in the root chakra. Edgar Cayce actually said that no, the Kundalini is arising from here, the sexual, creative, emotional energy of the second chakra, and rising up, Hindus say, to the crown. Edgar Cayce said it's going from the second to the first, and then up and over to the top of the head and then the third eye. Whichever way, that is what is actually happening during a Kundalini arousal. But many people experience it instead as an arousal of energy from the left chi toe, up the legs, through the hips, around the arms, top of the body, right side of the body, all the way down into the right toe. And this is because what's actually happening is that when you enter a meditation state and your heart begins to resonate at 7.83 hertz, which are the Schumann frequencies, as most of you know, of the Earth, and also alpha theta, that crossover frequency in alpha theta. Body being a resonating cavity, that energy travels down into the abdomen, the second largest cavity, or maybe the largest, I forget which, in the body, and then it slams up into the skull. Starts out at 7.83 hertz, but in the small cavity of the skull, the more confined cavity, it rises into megahertz. And that energy bangs on the somatosensory cortex. You can see how it's broken into lips, tongue, face, eye. Each one of these points in this band that goes across the top of the brain is associated with a part here. And so that's why people feel like the energy is going around like this, like in an orbit, but it's actually moving up the chakra system. And when the energy moves into megahertz, then the body becomes an antenna. This is why we become much, much more psychic and able to feel our own energy fields and the interaction of our energy fields with other people's energy fields is because of this antenna-like thing that happens. And so I want to just go in and show you more of a close-up of what's actually happening and bring in here the work of Andrew Newberg and a lot of people who have followed him in studying mystical experiences, basically starting in the 2000s. So Andrew Newberg, and for those who may not know him outside the US, is a radiologist and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania who decided to study monks, Buddhist monks, and Franciscan and Carmelite nuns for the monks while they were experiencing love and compassion meditation, for the nuns when they were having a full-on mystical experience. And what he'd do, he would take them into a lab, and they would lie down on a gurney with wheels and attach a button to their fingers and trail it into the radiology lab. He would leave them alone and let them get into their deep meditation, however long that would take. And when they reached it, they would push the button or tug it, and he would run into the room, wheel the gurney into his radiology lab, shoot them up with radioactive dye, and look at their brains and see what was actually happening. And after many, many studies, what he found was that the default mode network, that is the cerebral cortex, which is our beta, all of our thinking, our planning, our plotting, our imagining, all our worries, the ego, all of that during a mystical state shuts completely off, and all of the energy goes into the limbic brain right here. Most people associate the limbic brain with just the amygdala and think this is the amygdala and think this is where our negative emotions are, but there's actually a lot more than that going on in the limbic brain. The hypothalamic nuclei regulates the autonomic nervous system. So this is when you're moving into this mystical state. Let me back up a second and tell you something else that's really cool. So he found out that the default mode network in the cerebral cortex became inactivated, but something else major was activated. And it was coming out of the brain stem that we have these two neural streams. One is toward the sympathetic nervous system and relaxation. The other is toward the sympathetic nervous system and arousal. But when people go into a mystical state, they go so deep into the parasympathetic nervous system that there comes an arousal of the sympathetic nervous system because it thinks the person is dying or it needs some kind of stimulation to continue to exist. So when those two neural streams simultaneously move up into the brain, they cancel each other out. And when they do that, the parietal lobe loses all stimulation. Parietal lobes that are on the left side of the brain here and on the other side as well. The parietal lobes are really important because they are our sense of separation from one another. The sense of where we are in space-time and the sense of us being an individual entity, separate. And when the parietal lobe loses these neural impulses, it deactivates and the person moves into unity consciousness. So it is a major, major player, this parietal lobe. It's right here at the crown of the head by no accident. And that's why people actually move into mystical states, because then their sense of separation from their spirit, from this quantum sea of light, absolutely disappears. This is actually the definition of a mystical experience. Now, things are happening in other parts of the brain that we're going to look up as well, but emotion and aggression, the amygdala, is being powerfully affected by this activation during a mystical state. And one could make a case that this is why people are transformed, and why all the negative stuff starts to disappear, and also why people have experiences of dissociation. I don't know who I am anymore. This is probably the neural correlate to the ego because of emotion being here. But in a mystical state, the emotions are extraordinary and they come back and there's lasting change. There's also lasting change because memory and learning take place here in the hippocampus, all activated by mystical states. The cingulate gyrus, this is autonomic motor function, regulates behavior, processes emotions. The corpus callosum is the connective tissue between the left and right brain. This is why people become more balanced during and after mystical states, because it's a whole brain operation. That corpus callosum is just seething with electricity, right? And then lastly, the thalamus, this disc-shaped brain tissue. It's a relay center for the cortex, and so it handles ingoing and outgoing signals. So this is how come you're able to remember, even though this is deactivated, when you come out of that state, that information is going to flood back in so you can remember and benefit from it. And then down here at the bottom, I have a quote from something else we're going to look at. It says, structural neuroimaging studies have found high religious spiritual importance to be associated with increased cortical thickness in the parietal and occipital regions. So now this starts to be really important to us because, as you're going to see, on the mind mirror, we are measuring the parts of the brain where these experiences take place. So I found this meta study on mystical states, and here's a link to it down here. There were several authors, and what they did was looked at all of the most credible studies that they could find on people who either had come out of a background where mystical experiences had occurred, or they were actually moving into a mystical state using neuroimagery. QEEG, which is 19 or more channels of EEG on the head, MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, which is using sound waves to get a picture of what's going on inside the brain, fMRI, a video moving, positron emission tomography scans, which also is a radioactive dye. So I wanted to show you some of the things I thought were most interesting in these findings. So one of the earliest studies, actually, these are the people that Andrew Newberg followed in their footsteps, Beauregard and Paquette. They used an fMRI. All of their people were nuns, Catholic, mystical experiences. And what they found was activation in the right medial orbitofrontal cortex. So this is around the area of the eyes and the right brain, because it's about feeling. And the right brain is associated with feeling, creativity, emotion, spatial awareness, holistic. So there's a lot of right brain dominance that they found in these nuns. Now, the right middle temporal cortex, so as you know, we're measuring on the temporal lobes, parietal lobes, some chordates, and then interesting, the left medial prefrontal cortex. Now, the left prefrontal cortex has been associated with experiences or feelings of joy, bliss, love, compassion, and who associated them in that way is a neuroscientist named Richard Davidson. He also took Andrew Newberg's research on this parietal lobe deactivation and found out that all those people that Newberg was measuring were producing gamma. Left anterior cingulate cortex, part of that limbic system, more parietal lobe, left brain stem, and most importantly for us, visual cortex. So now we're talking about some alpha too. In these studies, again, Beauregard and Paquette, a couple of years later, nuns again, during a mystical experience, increased theta, a higher theta beta ratio, meaning more theta to less beta. Gamma 1, which I believe is low gamma. Theta connectivity, meaning theta throughout the brain. Long distant alpha connectivity, meaning alpha moving from the front to the back of the brain, side to the side of the brain, more of alpha synchrony state. Now, this should be pretty familiar to most, if not all of you, because what he's basically talking about here is somewhere between an awakened mind state and a gamma synchrony state. Only inside the brain, more of a whole brain synchrony state with the awakened mind during a mystical experience. Same thing for this Tenke and these two studies. No religion, various religions. Religion and spirituality were important to them. So these were people who had some kind of practice. And what they found, they had stronger alpha in the back of the head in both cases, both of these studies. So alpha, again, our sensory awareness that activates when we are excited, our senses are excited, and then alpha rolls around through the different lobes of the brain and starts to synchronize the brain. But sensory awareness is a real key here. And then the last one I pulled that was particularly relevant to us, multi-religious people and MRI. They just got an MRI, and what they found was that those who engaged in religious behavior or had an intimate relationship with their source had more right middle temporal cortex. So again, exactly what we're looking for in the mind mirror, an extension of alpha, an amplification of theta, for those two to stay steady and stable in the brain, and very possibly some gamma to go along with it, at least low gamma. And we did have low gamma in the original mind mirror in the original 44 hertz pattern. So then I pulled out these quotes from this meta study. Tinkey and colleagues extended the 2013 study to 20 years after the initial assessment. They found that greater posterior alpha was shown among those who initially reported religious spirituality as highly important versus those who did not, suggesting that there may be a critical stage in the development of religion spirituality, and that it may be associated with posterior resting alpha amplification. This interpretation is supported by findings showing that resting posterior alpha, EEG alpha, is stable over long periods for adults, which is suggestive of an individual trait. Now, this is not news to us, right? This is what Max Kay had found in 1976 when he was hooking up the swamis, the yogis, the healers, and the psychics. This is what our pattern is based on. But what's important here is that these were controlled lab studies that have been accepted into the scientific mainstream that prove what we're saying and relate our patterns to mystical experiences and Kundalini arousals. Here's another one. In Beauregard and colleagues, 2008, while quantitative EEG measures were obtained, Carmelite nuns underwent a mystical experience by recalling and reliving their most intense mystical experience. Compared to the control condition, in which the nuns recalled an intense experience with another person, they found increased theta power over left and central, frontal, and parietal regions, greater theta-beta ratio over frontal, central, temporal, and parietal regions, which is the whole brain, increased gamma-1 power over right temporal and parietal regions, increased theta connectivity as assessed by EEG coherence, where the theta is traveling from one part of the brain to the other, between left frontal and central areas, and enhanced long-distance alpha connectivity between all the different parts of the brain, particularly in the right brain. I don't mean parts, I mean lobes of the brain, the frontal, the temporal, the parietal, and the occipital. So they concluded that mediation of mystical experiences occurs via significant changes in EEG coherence and power. Okay, so now I have to tell you a very cool story. So as embarrassing as it is to say, even though I have been writing about gamma, teaching about gamma, giving interviews about gamma, and all of the wonderful things about gamma, I didn't have hardly any. I mean, I had a little tiny bit here. What I had was a super strong awakened mind and lots of evolved mind, unity consciousness flares in my patterns. I realized this dichotomy and said, you know what? I need to not be so hypersensitive around people, because people would come for trainings and have all this gamma, and it would make me nervous and ungrounded, and I would have to constantly ground. And so I started to ask, see, again, that word, I opened up to and asked that I'd be given an integrated gamma that didn't upset my nervous system and my back. I've been kind of thinking all along that I have spinal injuries, and maybe that's why I didn't have any gamma. And I don't want that gamma because it might hurt my spine, but I just swept it away and said, look, this Kundalini is unlimited. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to have it. And so I did. Maybe 5, 6, 8 times in that half year. And then I went to a life visioning retreat put on by Dawson Church in San Diego in late December. And Gary Grossbeck, Donna Bach, and I were there to measure the brainwaves of over 30 people who were attending that retreat. And after we did our opening baselines, mind mirror baselines on everybody, we were free to participate in it. And so I did, and I had so many wonderful pieces of guidance. I understood how to do the portal. It was a wonderful week of growth and healing for me. There was one guy in the group who said that he wasn't getting any visions. And I thought, oh, that's sad. And so I went and did a brainwave session with him privately. And sure enough, he encountered a block. But even after that, he still wasn't getting any visions, even though he cleared the block. And so then there was this night when everybody did healing energy for anybody who wanted to sit in the middle of the circle. And this one guy, sure enough, when he sat down, I very quickly went over to him and I said, please let me help this man clear this block and be able to see what he needs to see. And so how it worked was that then everybody in the group would put their hands on you, the healer, or the healers, if it was more than one person, I think it was, and send energy. And so I was really, my heart was so into helping him. I said, please let me help this person. And just tuned in to source and kind of begged. And the last thing I expected to happen happened. And it was that the Kundalini rose in my body and exploded in the same way it had during that healing on the interstate the 30 years before. Oh, heck, it was more than that. 22 to 72 is 50 years before. And I had never had that powerful an experience since then. And it just light washing. And I remember whipping back like a snake. And, I kept my hands on it, but I was just flowing in this light. It stopped at my neck. I don't know why. Possibly because I was starting to analyze what was happening. And after this was over and the energy had subsided and the guy got up and I said, did you feel that? And I was just still flowing, vibrating with this energy. And he said, I didn't feel anything, but thank you for your work. And I went, you didn't feel that? And I talked to Dawson about it. He says, it must have just been for you. And I said, oh, okay, but I really wanted to help him. And so I just was grateful for what had happened. And I came back home after, and my brainwaves had changed from this to this. Look at the difference in the gamma. Massive 100 hertz gamma synchrony pattern. Changes in low gamma, amplifications in mid gamma, amplifications in high gamma. Otherwise, the same exact brainwave pattern. Something that Kundalini arousal absolutely worked to answer what I had asked for integrated Kundalini. And ever since I came back home, I mean, I've done 30 mind mirror sessions since then, 40. It's always the same pattern. So it was a lasting change. And I felt the Kundalini arouse. It was the same Kundalini as before. And it was indeed like those many studies that Andrew Newberg did and that Richard Davidson backed up with his EEG studies. It was Kundalini. It was a mystical experience. It was gamma. And then I have one more slide to show you here. This is the guy that I healed in that Dawson Church life visioning retreat, who said he didn't feel anything. Okay, it is true that during the closing baseline, the people were asked, as Gary and Don and I monitored them, to connect with your spirit. This guy didn't have any spirit connection before. And it was not just the brainwave pattern that tells me that. I mean, actually, this is a good awakened mind pattern here. He didn't feel anything. But by the end of it, he was feeling it. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if, although he said he didn't feel the energy, that not just I, but the people who were holding on to me sent him that night. Something happened, some block cleared, because that is a vastly different brainwave pattern in it. And I wasn't the only one. Somebody else in that retreat had a Kundalini arousal, and she had really nice brainwave to start with. She had some gamma to start with, but during the closing baseline, she had so much gamma that I thought something had happened to the EEG, and so I switched her to a different EEG sensor, and she had the same pattern. Her gamma was out to here. It was amazing. And she was just living in bliss and joy and in wonderful shape. So now let's distill all of this, everything we've said so far. From my personal experience, what I've read, what people wrote about in this Kundalini Rising book and umpteen other books I've read, as well as the Casey teachings, meditate as often as you can, but not ever more than 1 to 1.5 hours at a time. I'll tell you a quick little story. I was giving a talk to an Edgar Casey group. They sent me around as part of their lecture group speakers bureau. And I was in Detroit and about to hook up a volunteer whose brainwaves everyone would see. And I walked up to her, get ready to hook her up, and said, and I had this really powerful intuition. I said, "Is something going on with your head?" And she said, "I have the worst headaches. I'm just agonizing headaches all the time. I am going to see a neurologist next week." And I just knew it was going to be gamma, and hooked her up, and she was just off the chart. She had a tornado-shaped brainwave pattern. And after the demonstration, when she closed her eyes and, she quieted down, some of that gamma went away, but it was really strong. After the meditation, I said, "How often do you meditate?" She said, 3 hours a day. I said, "No, no. Thinking of poor Anna Wise, her 15 hours a day. Don't do it for an hour and a half tops. 1 hour is plenty enough to get you where you want to go, because you're just tempting that Kundalini to blast up, which was what was happening to her. And I was writing my Your Psychic Soul book a few years later, and I wanted to write her story, so I contacted her, wrote her an email and said, "So what happened to the headache?" She said, "Oh, I cut it down to an hour a day, like you said, and the headaches went away." But she said, "Now I'm getting farther in meditation, and these little spirit children come and visit me at night. I wake up and they're these little balls of light, and they're in my room." And I thought, well, it didn't hurt her to cut down her meditation, so it shouldn't hurt anybody else. The whole idea and the whole reason I've told you this long story is because for me, it was, other than that spontaneous healing when I was so young, it was such a smooth, easy ride. And that's what we want it to be. Nobody wants to have the kinds of Kundalini arousals that these people in the Kundalini Experience book have had, where they got blasted. They didn't know what they were doing. They hadn't cleared anything. They didn't know how to react. They thought they should meditate, and they started meditating more. It was the absolute worst thing to do. And in addition to it being slow and easy, it's really best to do what Edgar Casey said: set an ideal. How high is your purpose? Casey said, if you went into meditation angry at yourself or someone else, or your ideal was very material in nature, that those energies that were rising up that Appian way could make you a Frankenstein. And I actually, I was very angry during a meditation that a practitioner was guiding me through a brainwave profile. Suddenly I got in touch with some anger during it. And oh my gosh, I could feel my energy field just smashing like a tumultuous sea. And my heart just had all this pain in it. And I went, oh, this is the anger. There must be some gamma in here and that I'm producing. And this anger is amplifying because of the gamma. And sure enough, after the meditation, that's exactly what it was. I went into high gamma. I don't know if it was because the anger or because I was in gamma to start with, and the anger amplified those energetic effects. But I have actually trained 2 people who had high ideals, but they didn't live up to them. They were famous healers, authors of books, and they, in their interactions with other people, were arrogant, unkind, and one of them had gamma, and boy, when she directed it at you, you felt it. I went into a terrible adrenaline rushes the 3 days I was there, even grounding in nature. I had to repair my energy field, connect with my heart, do meditative writings, find out how to deal with that kind of gamma directed anger. So just be aware that if you set an ideal, and it's a high ideal, peace, love, compassion, something like that, that's the direction that Kundalini energy is going to go in with you. But if you haven't done any inner cleanup work, that Kundalini energy may, probably will, try to clear that on those unresolved issues. And if you stay angry for long, it could be very ugly for yourself and other people. That's why this says engage in self-healing as needed. This is the crux of awakened mind work, isn't it? I mean, we're trying to get into an alpha theta state, go as deep as we can, and encounter what needs resolution and resolve it so that we come out of that meditation with insights and solutions that we can use to make our lives better. But you, even as you do that, don't think you're the only one who needs it. Everybody's working on stuff. At the end of meditation, I did not change Max and Anna's meditations that are in the meditation center. I didn't change their language. But in all of my meditations, you're going to see that they end with distribute the energies. This is what happened to the woman in Detroit. She didn't know to do that. And Edgar Cayce said that every time you meditate, those energies, the Kundalini energies, have aroused, and you need to redistribute them. So at the end of meditation, you can mentally rake the energies off of your head, and that will get rid of the headache if they're banging up there on the sensory motor cortex on the skull. And most importantly, not just rake the energy off, mentally usher it down into your limbs, tips of your fingers, the tips of your toes, and even into your organs, your cells. Really don't come out of meditation still feeling like there's a whole lot of energy in your head. It needs to be distributed for you to be balanced and grounded. And that's why this says ground in nature. Get out there, walk, get down to the 7.83 meditation frequencies, and spread out in nature. Get back to alpha, get back down to earth, get back down the bridge. Don't stay too high for too long without grounding. Some people say that the Kundalini energy burned up their nervous system and changed their brain in ways that made them less successful in the world, far more ungrounded. I think the Kundalini energy takes us where we need to go, when we need to go there. But if you ground back in nature, then that arousal can be slow and easy and joyful, blissful as it was for me, and not the way it is for too many other people. Key to the whole thing is to be loving and joyful, because that is the nature of Kundalini. Feel that sacred presence in yourself and in all of existence. Search for it. There's some wonderful meditations in the meditation center that will help you, especially Max Cade's meditations on meditation on, I called it, what did I call it? The encounter with light. Max knew that all you had to do was feel the energy, that it's right there. There's no difference between you and it. You are it. And he's got 3 fabulous meditations, 2 of them very short, and it just takes a split second. But if something's keeping you away from that energy, and you want the gamma, and you want the whole brain synchrony, the high intuition, the coherence that is gamma and Kundalini, that's where it starts. It's tuning into that presence. And then here, don't hesitate to ask for help if you need it. Help is everywhere. And the key is the word ask, because in my story, I tried to emphasize it as we were going, but I'll just circle back now and say, I asked for help before that first Kundalini arousal and that healing. I asked for some help with my family situation before my meditative writing started. I asked for integrated gamma before that second Kundalini, major Kundalini arousal at Dawson Church's workshop. It's about asking, and asking is what opens the floodgates, that bring you the answers. And then whatever you do, keep a journal. Remember what you learned. Use it, because that's how the change takes place. It's not easy, but it is an adventure in consciousness. And there's no spiritual bypass. You don't get to anything phenomenal without doing the foundational work first. But if you track the changes, especially the intuitive psychic expansion, the changes in your dreams, the guidance in your dreams that will occur during this journey of inner healing and meditation and asking, then you'll be able to look back and say, wow, I used to be a completely different person. Otherwise, you won't know it, because you're evolving and changing, right? And you're just completely unaware otherwise of how far you've come. And you need to be able to applaud yourself. Everyone needs to be able to applaud themselves for how far they've come. But don't get too excited about it. It's natural. And don't doubt your dreams. Put it into action. Be guided by it. And then another important thing down here, in the same way as that you set an ideal for the beginning of meditation, at the end of meditation, send energy to others. I don't need to tell you, it's real energy, but it's also going to disseminate and discharge your energy while bringing more in. Sometimes, rarely, thankfully, but sometimes I sit down to meditate and really I just want to work on a creative project or something, and I'll say, this is really great to do, but I really want to feel that energy. All I have to do is start sending prayers out to others, and then in it comes. It's just beautiful, floating, flowing light. And it's going to go out to other people. They need it, and it grounds you in the process. Most of all, don't doubt the need to stay grounded. It's so critical. Tons of books have been written on Kundalini. This is a wonderful book. He had so many Kundalini, Gopi Krishna, so many Kundalini challenges, but it's a fascinating book. This is kind of new agey book, but a nice one. Bonnie Greenwell, just from reading that one quote that I shared with you at the beginning of the slideshow, I can tell you that this is a wonderful writer who is crisp and clean and clear and writing from experience and done her research, not just trusting her own experiences, but those of others as well. The Kundalini Experience, this is Lisa Nella's book that I found on Anna's bookshelf. And lastly, enjoy the Kundalini multiverse. That's a pretty nice picture, isn't it? See how that person is so balanced and sees all the color and light, knows self to be an individual entity, but the same light out of which everything else is made. Free, making that quantum leap into who we can be in a very balanced and insightful way. All right, so that is it. Decide whether you have questions you want to ask, or even better, experiences of Kundalini that you want to share, because we would all love to hear your experiences.
Many years ago, I was doing a lot of Kundalini practices, Kriya practices, and one night I was in a semi-dream state, and all of a sudden it was like there was a tornado going on. I mean, right next to me. It was so intense. I had the realization, oh, this must be a Kundalini experience, but it scared me so much it brought me out of it. Hasn't reoccurred. So that's pretty much my conscious experience. Well, a friend and I were at a retreat center with a psychiatrist that was teaching meditation, but shouldn't have been. And my friend had an experience where she was at the cabin we were staying in, and she was crying, just fear-filled because she was burning up with heat. So I went up to the teacher and she said, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, she has a lot of problems. That's probably it. That's not a very response. So I went back, and if you know what they say, if you only have one tool, then a nail, a hammer, and the whole world is a nail. So, well, I'm pretty good at what I do with hypnosis. So I helped her into hypnosis state. And then I began doing a Hanuman mantra, which Hanuman controls the prana to make the prana conscious. So I appealed to that deity, that force, that energy, along with the hypnosis. And within a couple, 3 minutes, it quieted down with the agreement that it would be released over time in a safe manner. So those are my two encounters with Kundalini.
Yeah, which is just basically what I was trying to convey, that feeling helpless and powerless is a resistance to the Kundalini force, which is trying to clear your resistances. So you can get into a very crazy place. It's good that you had that ability to help her down, where she came to consciousness that she was not helpless and powerless, and that it would work with her and for her. I'm curious as to how things unfolded in future years.
Just a gradual awakening, becoming more aware of herself, and gradual release of old patterns from the past. But it stopped that crisis that she was in. She was not worth anything at the moment. She was like burning up. And that's not an uncommon experience when it's
right.
Control. So the Hanuman mantra, it was a fairly short one, but the particular one I used is it makes the prana conscious to remove all blocks to the rising of the pure Kundalini Shakti at the base of the spine, which is called Sita. Sita being reunited with Ram at the crown center, Ram being the divine masculine. So that's the purpose of the mantra I use, was to clear any and all blockages using that mantra, but to make the prana conscious so it could do it at a gradual pace.
She was lucky you were there.
True.
And there's probably no luck involved in it.
I agreed to that also.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that.
I did have an experience at a meditation retreat that was very much like yours. At a previous meditation retreat, I was being healed in a circle of healers, and I had a vision of my hands activating chakra centers in them, which I had my hands down, but I had mask on, so I couldn't actually see, but I had a really strong vision of activation in my hands. And I was curious about that because I had no idea there were any points of activation in your hands at all. But I thought about that. And the next event I went to several months later, when we were doing, we do a big group healing. We prepare as a large group in a walking meditation, and then we get into small groups and meditate or heal one person in the center of each circle. And I just had this, I had a huge heart opening before I went into that room. And I just had this idea suddenly it was very much like what you described, actually, to actually activate my hands. And I just thought, I started flicking them like that. And at the same time, I went up to my 8th center and my heart was already just wide open. And I asked if there was any way I could be a conduit for healing for the person, whoever it was going to be, to help them. And I just kept asking for that. And then all of a sudden my hands just lit up and started, I'm shaking just a minute. So I'm telling you. So it continued to build and build and build. My whole body was vibrating, and my body itself was doing very strange, like really fast movements. And I couldn't replicate them for you now, but my hands wanted to be up somehow. It didn't feel like the energy was coming up in this case. It felt like it was coming, it may have more in from my heart and through my hand. I don't understand how, but it was, by the time we got to the point where we were supposed to get into our circles, I knew, and I'm not this type of person, but I knew that I needed to get at the head of the circle. And by this point, my whole thing was like, it was just like all over the place. And previously I'd been quite judgmental when I saw people get into any of this kind of thing. I was kind of thinking, wow, that seems like a bit much. Must be able to put on. I mean, I was very judgmental about it, but then this happened, and it bent me right over backwards. And someone came behind me and put their hand and supported my back, because I didn't even know I could bend back like that. It was the most amazing. I had tears just running down my face. Like I was laughing and crying at the same time, thanking and all mentally, because we're preparing to heal somebody. And it was the most amazing experience I've ever had. I've had a series over time, and this one was the biggest that I've had. But integrating it after was really difficult for me. And I'm so thankful that you have put this on, because it has helped me to understand more about things I may be able to do to help myself. Because for the last year and a half, almost a year and a half, I've been trying to bring myself into some kind of balance, and it did set me back. Although I was in absolute awe and joy and didn't want it to end, I took a big step back and was like, yikes, that's it's huge. It was so huge, and I didn't know what to do with it.
Fantastic. I'd love to hook you up to the mind mirror. Guess Julie's going to do that, right?
Yeah, we're going to do that together. Yeah,
That's fantastic. The cool thing is that we just saw you remember so distinctly what every atom and cell, what that felt like. So you can do that on the mind mirror, and she can see you go from your ordinary self we're talking to now to who that Kundalini goddess was, still is, but wasn't, especially in that moment. Gonna see some gamma for sure. Thank you for sharing that story. What a wonderful story. It helps to realize we're not alone, doesn't it?
I think, that having some frame of reference for what this is, what I could possibly do with it. And that my biggest fear was that it was just going to suddenly happen again spontaneously when I'm not in a meditation.
When you're driving.
downtown shopping or on a beach, or like, what do you do with that? Because I'm pretty sure, like the group I was with, they didn't want to look directly at me, so I think it scared them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, and so that's where that grounding comes. There's a go ahead.
I just have a question, because Shelley, I'm just wondering about the sleep, if they're connected. I just wonder if you want to go there or not. I'm wondering that as I'm sitting here.
Yeah, I've had extreme problems with sleep since. I had a problem with it before, but it has become extreme to the point where I just stopped sleeping for days and days. And
I hear that a lot. I hear that from people.
no.
But then it stops. It stops.
I'm hoping that the mind mirror will help me. The whole subject of alpha bridging really intrigues me, and I have a feeling that there's some problem since this time of me being able to bridge with the alpha to expand my alpha brainwave state.
Could be.
I've been working with Anna Weiss's protocol.
CDs.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, it could be that you're so high up in gamma. An interest, you bring up something really interesting. So the awakened mind is a humanoid shaped figure. You've got a head, and then you've got these arms, the alpha. You've got the theta, which is the hips, and the delta, which is a long, flary skirt. So when we got the Ballistis Mind Mirror 6, and I asked them to add those 2 extra bands of gamma into there, which was 49 to 64 hertz, 44 to 64 hertz. I thought, interesting. I know I've seen some people producing gamma on the old mind mirror. Now we're going to see what it looks like on the new mind mirror. And what I saw suddenly, then everybody who had gamma showed up for sessions within a concentrated period of time. So luckily I was able to make these connections. And what actually happens to the pattern when people develop the gamma is that the head gets bigger, like a halo. The alpha can typically stay, but usually does not, as wide an amplitude as it was before. And the theta decreases in amplitude, because now all the energy is moved up into higher frequencies. So it might be that to be able to sleep, it's grounding. It's just going out. I see you're in a beautiful place right now, just spending out time out in nature, looking at the textures of leaves, the green on that fence, the color of the post next to you, and just really bring that alpha in back to its, if it did decrease, bring it back to its greater amplitude. And then that's going to give you more amplitude in theta, which is where REM sleep takes place, next to delta, where deep dreamless sleep takes place. So it might be that you need some more grounding, but it's also true that I have heard reports from people who were not literally went 2 weeks without a wink of sleep. And didn't bother them at all. They were running on that high octane Kundalini, and they just created, produced, had the most amazing ideas, took every download, wrote it down, and then finally when they started to sleep, then they went back to this saga of great ideas and started to put them into action. So it may be that you won't sleep for a while, but if indeed Kundalini is as cooperative as we are claiming it is, and Hypno Bob just said it was for his friend, then it may well be that it's just a matter of asking, saying what needs to happen. If I want to sleep, what needs to happen? Or do I need to sleep? If I don't need to sleep, how do I use this time?
I have been working a lot on energetic blocks, emotional blocks as well, because I did realize that maybe the energy could move through me more smoothly if some of the emotional stuff was dispersed.
For sure. That's fantastic. What, may I ask what techniques you're using to work on those blocks?
EFT with somatic therapy.
EFT. Fantastic.
The two together in one practitioner.
Wonderful. So you have the tools. That means you're way ahead of just about everybody else, because most people do not have the tools, right? And these are the people that really this slideshow was intended for, the people who may not understand what that tornado is, Bob. What's a tornado? You know, have I gone completely nuts? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And good luck with it. I know you're going to do wonderfully, because you certainly do have everything you need, the resources you need. And Kundalini clearly knew you were ready. Anybody else? Other comments, questions, thoughts, criticisms? We'll take that too. Doubt, whatever. Cecilia, are you going to say something to us?
Yes. I did an advanced workshop with Joe Dispenza, and he does a pineal meditation, but they go on for hours, and up to like 4 hours. And I think recently in Mexico he did one and broke the record up to 5.5 hours. So you're saying that we should do just 1 to 1.5 hours.
You bring up a tough question there. So I was talking to Julie Edwards about this by email or phone. And, most meditation teachers, because Kundalini can have such powerful ramifications and not all of them great, will say, don't do anything to arouse the Kundalini. And Joe Dispenza is directly arousing the Kundalini. That is exactly his whole shtick. He's doing it. He's rousing gamma. That whole perineum, and for those of you who may not know, he has people tighten the perineum muscles between the gonads and the anus, and breathe a certain way and jolt that Kundalini power straight up to the top of the head. I find that a little scary. I adore Joe Dispenza. I love the man. I admire every single thing he's teaching. And maybe in the context of the group, let me say that differently. I suppose that in the context of a group where there are people who can help people who get into trouble, it's a wonderful, brilliant approach. But what if somebody has Kundalini arousal when there's no one else around, and it's a blast of light that gets them really confused? So I prefer the slow, easy way of meditation, inner clearing, and then let that Kundalini come up in its own time and in its own way. But on the other hand, that's not what happened to me on the interstate, and it was the best experience of my life. So I don't have any answer to that question. I guess the only answer we can really have is that everything that happens is perfect. So if you can sit in meditation for 5.5 hours, and fantastic. But for people alone, who don't have even a psychotherapist to call, don't, as for me, have even the people they live with that they can talk to about and who could understand these kinds of things, don't have any resources, I'd say take it slow and easy. Hour and a half, that's plenty. But Joe Dispenza, that's kind of a horse of a different color. Joe Dispenza is having fantastic success, and so are the people who work with him. So
Yeah,
bless him for doing what he does.
it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, extremely. And you too, Cecilia, just for a second, are you still being a holistic doctor? You opened your own practice?
Well, I had to put some things on hold over the last year, of course, and now I'm doing it again. So I've been doing a variety of things. I have to get with you to maybe come back for another tutorial or whatever, because I really want to go on with this work, and I know how intense it is. And I wanted to experience Joe Dispenza, because the stories from that were amazing. And I did end up having a Kundalini experience there, where the energy shot up and like a bolt of lightning to my head. And after that day, I had to skip the next day. I was toasted. I mean, I was, it was intense, and now I know that's what it was. So I know it's a very intensive thing. And so I agree with you. You can't do it for many hours like that if you're alone. It could be very frightening for people, but there were over 1,000 people there. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That Joe Dispenza is a real gift to the world. He really is. Dawson Church, too, they're best friends. I went on a wine tour with the two of them in Bordeaux after we were all at a conference in Paris. And I have to say that I already knew Dawson Church and just find him to be the totally open-hearted, loving person. But Joe Dispenza, I went on the wine tour because of Joe Dispenza. I had a dream before that said that I was shy. I didn't know if I wanted to be on a wine tour with Joe Dispenza. What would I say to him? But this dream told me I saw myself in a cafe and having been at a table with him and walking in and having just an absolute blissful experience. And so I signed up for it and went on the wine tour. And he was pretty preoccupied with a couple of friends who were there on it. Although we did he invited me for a long walk, and we had some fantastic conversations about consciousness. And I have to say that a lot of people say he's an egomaniac and, stuff like that. He is the most sympathetic, empathetic, kind, and true and generous and honest person among all the spiritual teachers I've met in my 72 years, bar none. He is the real deal, and he's doing fabulous, fabulous work.
I agree.
So thrilled.
I agree. And some of his ongoing workshops, people are having out of body and out of worldly experiences. It's just incredible.
Yeah, totally works. If you want to take the fast path. Put your seatbelt on and hold on to the rocket seat. Did you want to say something, Cheryl?
No, I just had to laugh, and so you knew I was laughing, but I understand. I can relate.
Is that the bell that tolls? It might be. My grandfather clock just rang. Okay, well, let us go ahead and sign off then. And let me say thank you for listening to my lengthy story.
Thank you. It was very, very useful and helpful. This was really a fantastic thing you put on today. I appreciate it greatly.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
me too.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Yes, absolutely loved it. Thank you so much, Judith.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, bless you. My friend Sylvia also sent a message. She says, loved your presentation. Thanks and love. Lisa Arsenault, thank you so much. Okay, fantastic. Then I'm at peace with my long story. And thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and hope to see you soon